Can I say welcome to everyone, first of all, for one of our monthly forums? In this forum, we're going to concentrate on what's called community resilience because it's going to be increasingly important in the coming years. It is now because we're facing more extreme weather, like floods, like heat excess, like air pollution, which is caused by extreme weather, like sea level rises, like droughts and wildfires. And the question is, how do we prepare for that? How do we work with statutory authorities to prepare for that? And how do we, as communities, prepare for that as well? What do we do and what can we do? And we've got several speakers to talk to us today. One is Ian Morris. Ian is from Groundwork, and he is involved in a project which is all about preparedness in London. And he's going to start and talk to us about what that means and what prepare and what they do. And then we've got Hallie Healy, who's with us. And Hallie is from the University of Birmingham, but she's also on our core group because she lives in Enfield. And we're doing a project with Hallie as the University of Birmingham, EnCaf and the University of Birmingham, with Paul, who is from Locomotion. And that is about developing some world cafes to look at how different communities view the impact of extreme weather and how we can build a vulnerability index to find who's most vulnerable. Then we've got Avita talking to us about being a researcher. We've recruited 8 researchers, 4 each for the 2 cafes, to help us run the cafes and to get people in to come to those cafes. And then we're going to talk to Paul from Locomotion about why Locomotion is involved, because what we do is quite central to their mission. Thank you for joining us today. And as I said, Ian works for Groundwork, and their program, which is called the London Resilient Communities Program, which is about helping communities to prepare. So maybe you could start, Ian, first of all, by telling us what that is.
A bit about Groundwork.
London, about the resilience program.
Yeah, so there's a program called, as Francis just said, called London Resilient Communities, which is a project that's funded by the London Resilience Unit at the Greater London Authority. And the program really is to, as it suggests by the name, is to try and kind of build the resilience of communities across London. And that is trying to build resilience across a whole host of actual and potential risks that are upon us, and that could new ones could also unfold as time goes by, and some of those are projected to increase. There's climate risks such as flooding and heat waves, as Francis has mentioned, air pollution. It can also be risks such as power outages. It can be attacks on certain communities, as we've seen, like certain religious communities or certain ethnic communities. It can be kind of droughts. It can be a whole range of things, even food shortages and water shortages. So it's really kind of resilience against whatever is thrown at communities that we might foresee, and sometimes we might not foresee. And it tries to do that in a variety of ways. So it's got a few grant streams and support programs. So one was to try and create up to 20 what we call community resilience hubs, which is really where groups or organizations at the community and faith levels might have either a building or access to a building. So and then another one is to provide people with grants to build what we call a community emergency plan, which is really possibly a fancy name for a document where communities think about what makes sense to them in their communities and based on their assets and strength in terms of what the risks are to their communities, what they've got the ability to respond to, and what they're comfortable with doing as well. So that's not necessarily a venue, but it could be a WhatsApp group in a community that responds when there's a particular crisis in their community. And then we've also just launched something called the Climate Connected Communities Programme. I'll post this in the chat slightly later, which is a grant for people to build climate resilience in their communities.
You talk about build climate resilience, but what do we mean by resilience? What is that?
So I think you were on the call, Francis, last Tuesday when Professor Mark Pelling from UCL describe resilience as a bit like a hammer hitting a sponge. It's when there's an impact of something, but then in the case of the sponge bounces back to its original shape. And I think when there's an impact in the community, it doesn't necessarily mean the community bounces back always to the same shape. If we think back to COVID, it took some time for people to be able to kind of restore their, some kind of normalcy. And obviously that was quite an extreme case. But it's about the community being able to, respond to a crisis and restore some kind of normalcy. So whether it's a flooding, whether it's a kind of a heat wave, whether it's something like a pandemic, and and the key to that is really the planning and the preparedness of that community, so that when those things happen, although it might be people scrambling around a bit, it won't necessarily be super smooth. At least there's a plan in place. People have got a sense about what assets exist in their communities, and they've got some sense about what to do, who to go to, who will do what. It's just been a bit more prepared about that.
When you talk about being prepared is a crucial issue, isn't it? I mean, when you look at some of the local authorities and some of the local resilience forums that have been set up across the country, many of them only deal with the crisis when it happens. So like Paris, for example, in 2003, was part of a heat wave that went across Europe that killed 70,000 people. Paris bore the brunt of it, but they didn't have a strategy. They weren't prepared for it. They now do. We don't. How important is it not just to respond to a strategy, to a crisis when it happens, but to be prepared well before that so they can get the right infrastructure in place?
Yeah, no, I think it's crucial. That's a great example. I think kind of COVID was probably another one as well. I think I can't remember the same, but I think there's a quote from President Roosevelt to do with plans are like, once something happens, plans almost become a little bit meaningless in the sense that you have to replan because you never know what's going to happen. But the importance of planning is the important part. I think what he meant by that was that whilst the plan might change as soon as something happens because the circumstances change, you've at least done all the planning and you know what your options are, you know what to do next. So I think in the context of emergency, it is around, whilst you might not know the exact nature and scale of the crisis, at least if you've done some research and you've built a bit of community, you've worked out what's already there. You might have talked to, for example, your local authorities emergency planning team and made some connections. You might have touched base with local community centres, faith groups, your local, what you call your CVS, your umbrella body for the civil society sector, and worked out what's already there and made those connections. And then together, if you can form a plan based on what might happen, like I say, whilst that plan won't reflect probably what happens or the scale of it exactly, it at least means that you've got that plan in place, you've got those connections, you've got those responsibilities and those relationships to enable you to respond in a bit more of a coherent way. So like I say, whilst you might not be it might not be completely smooth, it won't be the opposite either. And I think the key thing is that the state isn't really kind of set up to respond and be able to deal with crises on its own. And COVID, we saw that when we saw the mutual aid groups pop up and how significant a role they played in that and how quickly they were able to mobilize compared to the state, for example.
But does it mean working with statutory authorities to look at more infrastructure things like ensuring, for example, their green spaces which are not threatened, that there are enough cooling centres around where people can go when there's heat excess, of finding volunteers to go and visit the most vulnerable, and in order to do that, having a vulnerability index so we know who is most vulnerable? Does it mean doing things like that as well? And are local authorities really thinking about that as strategically as they should?
Yeah, I mean, in answer to your second question first, I think it really depends a lot on the local authority. We know, particularly these days, and increasingly that a lot of local authorities are increasingly stretched. I think there is the review of the deal that local authorities get into what funding they get. Some local authorities have benefited, some have lost out, so that's putting new pressures on that. So it really depends on the local authority in many different ways, and each one, even within London, can be kind of quite starkly different. So the answer to that is that it really depends. And I think in terms of what you were talking about, in terms of, yes, we need the role of volunteers and the civil society sector is absolutely crucial to that. Going back to what I was saying before about the state can't do this alone, and there are tools such as on the GLA's website there is a mapping tool where you can see things that you can put layers. I think it was developed. I don't know if it was developed by Bloomberg or in partnership with Bloomberg. I can't quite remember that, but they've got like a tool which allows you to look at things like flood risk, heat risk, where there's indices of deprivation, the multiple indices of deprivation, where there's green spaces and a lack of. And I believe you can also maybe either overlay these or contrast them as well. So you can look at things side by side. So it allows you to see your local communities from a geographical perspective based on different risk. And then and I'm sure your local authority will also have things like risk registers, and they will also have documents relating to what their plans are for different types of risk, whether it's climate related or not as well. So all of that data is a worthwhile thing to look at when you're looking at both your assets in the area and your strengths, but also looking at what the predominant risks are perceived to be in your geographic areas.
I mean, that's quite interesting because the London communities, London climate emergency people have done a map called Cool Spaces where you can see all the cool spaces in London. In central London, there are a lot, but if you look in Enfield, there's only 4, and it's libraries, and no one really knows that they're cool spaces. So it's all about getting more and also getting information out because it's no good having being prepared if people don't know where to go and what to do. So how important is getting information out to people well in advance?
Yeah, really important. And obviously, people are very busy. We suffer from information overload these days, and it's often not until some kind of a kind of a risk or a crisis happens that people will necessarily absorb or be interested in that kind of information. That's obviously another challenge that we face, is trying to get people to think about and be aware of risks, as well as those kind of offers that are in place before something actually happens. And that's can be quite a hard task. And that's kind of like partly where like kind of smart and strong communications comes in. But it's linked to the planning again. It's really important to do in advance, but it can be quite a challenge if you're in an area, for example, where flooding is known about and is fairly regularly, or I'm sure you'll find those communities are really on it because there's obviously a vested interest and they kind of see it and they breathe it, sometimes even on an annual basis. But if it's not, it becomes a harder thing to communicate. So yeah.
So, I mean, what's your advice to groups like our own in working with local authorities? What's the best way to go around it so that we work collaboratively together?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, doing a little bit of, I would say doing a bit, I'm sure everyone on this call is doing great work in their communities, and just building community itself is a form of resilience. It doesn't necessarily, you might not call it community resilience, but it is community resilience because you're building the community. I think if you want to go into more the official community resilience space, then it is around maybe trying to kind of reach out to your local authority, local emergency planning team, making those connections, finding out what's happening, what you can do. You can talk about maybe where the gaps are. You can think about your own, if you're kind of like hyper local groups, what's going on in your particular area. Talk to people, talk to the groups, the community centres, the faith groups, talk to the local, what I call the CVS, whatever that is in Enfield. I'm not sure. And it sounds a lot, but that will give you a kind of bit of a picture of what's out there already, what the actual perceived risks are, and then maybe where you as individual or collective organizations can support that process within the resources that you have available, because I know a lot of community groups are very stretched as it is, and this might feel like another thing you have to do on top of safeguarding and risk assessment and all the other things. But I think really think about community resilience as an extension of what you're doing already, because I'm sure if a crisis hits, a lot of us who are involved in community work, whether professionally or voluntary, would just instinctively just want to go and help our communities. So really just think of it as an extension of that.
Okay, and finally, in your London Resilience team, you're offering to 15 groups £1,000 that you would choose the groups who are doing interesting and good things. Is that a way not just getting them to do good things, but to think ahead, to think strategically, to think that these things are important?
Yeah, and whilst we recognise these are small grants, we're very well aware that there's only so much you can do with £1,000, so they are quite small, and we're not expecting people to do things that are unreasonable for that amount. We are hoping that for people that either are or also aren't involved in climate resilience at the moment, that maybe this kind of opportunity might kind of catalyze them to try and do more work, possibly try and get more resources, or to make those initial connections and relationships to be able to kind of continue climate resilience beyond the scope of the project.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Um, that's really great. You've given us some background information and you tell us what you do. And it's great to know there is an organisation like yours in London that is doing this. So I know you want to stay on for the questions, and then you have to go ahead to prepare for something else, putting your children to bed, you said. So you're going to stay on for the questions. I'm going to interview Hallie next, and then we'll open it up to questions, and then, please feel free to go. So thank you, Ian. Okay, so Hallie, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Great.
Let's see. You're there. Okay. So Hallie is, as I said, from the University of Birmingham. She's also on our core group, but she's here talking in her role as the University of Birmingham partner, because we're partnering with them and we're partnering with Local Motion to do a project that we'll talk about. So Hallie, we're talking about community resilience and how communities can best adapt to extreme weather. And one of the reasons for doing the project is to look at where we can find the people who are most vulnerable. Is that one of the main reasons we're trying to do this project? To say, yes, it's okay to do community resilience, but we've got to really address the people who are going to be affected the most.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we have a problem. We know cities are unprepared for extreme weather, and that it's the people who are least able to protect themselves that are the worst affected, and that there are also statutory mandates to address these problems. So one of these key mandates is the Climate Change Act of 2008, and within that requirement to develop climate change risk assessments and national adaptation programs. And the third national adaptation program actually sets out a mandate for focusing on infrastructure and nature recovery and public health at local government level. And this is a welcome development, but this act and these measures, the measures that it recommends, for example, around supporting adaptive planning through investment and implementing nature-based solutions and setting standards for building sustainability. They're important, but they don't really touch the sides of the day-to-day experience of people living in urban areas who are left sweltering or shivering in their homes, or have respiratory illnesses because of mold or damp, or are isolated, when their streets are washed out. And part of the issue is the fact that these problems are sometimes understood and approached by authorities, planners, people in positions of power as problems that have technological fixes rather than needing social solutions. Or There's often a very narrow, sort of siloized understanding of vulnerability itself in these circles. And one of the key lessons I've learned from talking to people dealing with extreme weather in the West Midlands in particular, and I'll tell you a bit about that in a moment, is that vulnerability means different things to different people in different places at different times, and it can be quite complex, especially when people are living with multiple challenges at once, for example, to do with age or physical and mental health, or lack of income, homelessness, gender, inadequate housing, and sometimes all of these things together, right? So it's really important that residents are able to define for themselves who is vulnerable, what does vulnerability mean, and what kind of support is needed.
I kind of come in there because you said it's important that, communities decide for themselves. And the project we're doing with you that we call then Adapt and Local Motion is about finding out what communities feel, isn't it, about their situation and their adaptability and what they think should be done in their own fears. Can you tell us very briefly, because we've only got 15 minutes and there's several questions,
Absolutely. Yeah, I've just popped a link.
what is the Adapt program?
Sure. So it's a spin-off of West Midlands Adapt, and this was and is a decision-centric research project. So it's an action research project that aims to influence policy and planning around adaptation, taking a neighborhood based approach, because you can only really understand vulnerability when you're working at neighborhood level with residents themselves. And even though the project originated in the West Midlands, I think what both regions have in common is that residents in both places, there and in Enfield, are all facing cost of living crises, cutbacks in services, and real bread and butter issues that are actually all worsened by extreme weather. And yet there are no concrete sort of proactive plans in place. The approach tends to be reactive and kind of disaster centered. And that's something we're trying to get beyond.
And we're doing it, aren't we? Just to let people know, we're running what we call world cafes in two areas, one Upper Edmonton in the board there, and one in Cockfosters, the east and the west, because they will have very different problems. And we're doing that, aren't we? Because it's important to realize that different communities where they're placed do see things differently and do experience extreme weather and problems in a different way.
Sorry, was there a question in there, Francis?
That was a question, yeah.
Sorry, I was reading a comment about drain covers and thinking,
no.
yes.
I was saying that we're doing the World Cafe approach to get people to see, to tell us what they feel.
Absolutely.
In order that we understand that different areas, even within one borough, have different problems.
Sure. Oh, great. Absolutely. So World Cafe is a method that's been around since the probably 70s or 80s, and it involves having relaxed but structured, facilitated conversations at small tables with residents to elicit lived experience, views, concerns, and priorities, in this case, around the impacts of extreme weather. And we're doing this in Upper Edmonton and Cockfosters, and these wards, as Francis mentioned, were chosen because of the distinctness of the issues that they face. So there are particular questions that we'll be discussing, namely, what kinds of extreme weather have people experienced and how has it affected them and their neighbors? What kind of responses have people experienced? So kind of asset mapping, like what Ian was touching on. So what worked well and what could use improving? And then finally, what do people value and want to protect in their neighborhoods and how now into the future?
Okay, and to help us do that, we've got some researchers, haven't we? We've recruited 8 researchers for each of the cafes, and they will be helping us run the cafes with you, and they will be helping to recruit people to come to the cafes. I mean, that's a really good idea to get people from the local community, isn't it? Involved in the infrastructure organization of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the role of community researchers in this small project is huge. They're as important as the participants themselves, not just because ideally they come from the areas and so they have their own insights, but it's about providing a mediating role, so bridging the perceived gap between researcher and participants. Even though I'm a resident of Enfield, participants will always see me as an academic and consequently see themselves as non-expert or not knowing enough, and that's just not true. So community researchers are really important in terms of bringing their own insights, but also being relatable and helping get conversations started, making sure people are at ease, but of course in facilitating. So once the conversations start, they're sitting at these small tables, making sure everyone's included, keeping conversations on topic because they can take on a life of their own, and recording the data with audio recorders and writing on tablecloths. So it's all about sort of sharing, meeting people in your neighborhood, storytelling, but it is a research project at the end of the day, so we have to make sure that ideas are represented correctly and collected well. And then after the workshops, it's also important that community researchers are involved in the analysis because we're trying to avoid being extractive researchers. So ideally, we'll have the community researchers doing some sense checking of the data. And when we get to sort of the dissemination stage, the sharing results stage, hopefully at a big public event, they'll also be sharing their views and their experiences and their own perceptions.
Talk about that with Paul because he's helping us host that.
Take note, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but one of the aims is talks about finding the vulnerable people, and you've got researchers having you to help us develop a vulnerability index from those cafe events, plus other information we get, in order to help us find those vulnerable people. Now, how important, how difficult is that?
Oh, that's really important because I think any data that we collect has to be ground truth in reality. And part of the work is also to generate these climate risk and vulnerability assessments. So the climate scientists and public health experts at the university are going to create a map, like a visualization that provides an aggregated sort of overall rating of risk and vulnerability in the different wards. But these aggregate rankings are made up of different layers of a wide range of vulnerabilities. So population density, surface temperature, surface flood risk, river flood risk, combined socioeconomic vulnerability data. So incorporating data from the index of multiple deprivation, and all kinds of other data that are then sort of added together and averaged up. And we're able to show this data at a resolution, I think, of 100 meters, 100 square meters, which is more detailed, I think, than current municipal reporting, which I think works on a 1 kilometer level. So we're hopefully going to be able to create a pretty accurate picture. And that kind of data is important because it shows where the gaps are, where the most urgent problems are, where investment is most needed, and where planners need to pay more attention to, not just in terms of whatever their business as usual way of planning, but again, taking vulnerability into account and complex and compound vulnerabilities.
Finally, I mean, we're doing this project, and very often when people do projects, it's like something they do and they put it on the shelf and they're on to something else. We're not thinking of doing it that way, are we? We're thinking of this being an ongoing process afterwards, where we address community resilience in the long term by looking at the different extreme weather events that could take place, what we can do about it. And we can go into the rest of this year and next year dealing with that in a very positive way.
Yeah,
that was the question.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So where do we go after the World Cafes, right?
Yeah.
So the idea here is to lay the groundwork for much longer term thinking, planning, and action. And all of this should be owned and negotiated and steered by communities, by residents, right? So, but with the assistance and accountability of the people that have the necessary skills, capacities, and resources, including financial. So on the back of this project, we'd like to see a few things. We'd like to see the staging of more community climate conversations. So we'll be sharing during our grand finale event something that we're calling a Cultivating Climate Conversations Handbook, which is basically the manual for doing what we're about to do. We're just going to put that out to the public so they can replicate where they want to. But we also want to lay the groundwork for more proactive, networked, coordinated resilience planning with everyone who has a role. And this includes local government, utilities, blue light services, health and social care, and GPs and local businesses and community groups and charities. So we can go beyond short-term planning and responding to disasters and hopefully avoid them by being ready. And it also includes finding ways of taking advantage of extreme weather, which sounds funny, even feels funny to say, but here I'm talking about looking at ways of capturing excess water to store it for times of drought, steering more regenerative, longer-term urban planning, generating renewable energy and investing proceeds into community projects, and just in general, rethinking urban well-being and doing it differently.
All right, well, thanks. That gives us a really good overview of what we're trying to do, and I hope we succeed. I think, we've organised it well in advance, and it looks as if it's going to be, so certainly our first cafe, which is in April, it's going to be, I think, successful. I'm going to open it up to everyone now, but before I do, can I say if any of you on this call live in Upper Edmonton or live in Cockfosters and you would like to join that, let me know, and then we'll put your name down. The one in Upper Edmonton is on April the 31st, and the one in Cockfosters is on May the 26th, and they take place
30th.
between...
April 30th.
Pardon? Sorry, April the 30th and May the 26th. I've added an extra day to April, didn't I? And it's between 10 and 2 o'clock. So if you're in either of those wards and you'd like to take part, please let me know. So if anybody else, if people would like to ask questions, please put your hand up. And if you do ask a question, can you please put the camera on? Can I start? There are some questions in the chat. And one it says, "Hi, Harry. Are you also collecting data related to the vulnerability to food shop stocks and shortages, which is, if you like, an extreme situation?"
Yeah, well, absolutely. Look, we are in these wards to talk to them about their experiences with extreme weather. So if that is an experience, and it has come up in other workshops in the West Midlands where, there's just run on supplies because people go out and panic buy, then those are the kinds of things that we collect. So we collect that anecdotal data and we make sure it goes into the report. But this is a qualitative exercise. So we're basically taking stories, not numbers. We're not trying to quantify these kinds of things in any way. But certainly if they're being reported in neighborhoods, we are collecting that data and sharing it.
Okay, and Sani, you've got your hand up.
All right then. Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah,
All right.
we can hear you.
All right. Then. My name is Asani. I'm speaking from Nigeria. My question to Harley is that I think there is a need to put together a disaster response team, and then secondly, I actually factored in the the three types of resilience in terms of the adaptive, the absorptive, and the transformative resilience. So my question to her basically is that I think we should focus more on reducing vulnerability and increasing resilience. The attention to be on reducing vulnerability. What are the measures put in place to reduce the vulnerability of the people? That's my question to Ali.
That's a good question, Harry, because we're talking about finding the vulnerable. How do we then go to the reduced vulnerability?
Well, that is a good question. If I had the answer to that and could give it to you in 30 seconds, I'd be a very happy person. First, in terms of the disaster response team, I think those exist already, but this is the problem that we're trying to address. We want to do more than respond to disasters. We want to avert them in the first place, Asani. So that's what we're trying to do by anticipating and planning in advance. And vulnerabilities, that's a hugely important issue. And again, I I guess the way that we're approaching that in the project is we're going into neighborhoods and asking, who and where are you vulnerable people? I mean, I've actually had people who have said to me, I don't like, people with disabilities, I don't like being labeled vulnerable. I'm quite good at caring for myself. There are people who need more help than I do. So I think we have to be careful when we're using that label, who we're attaching it to, and what the implications are there. And for us, it's all about having communities map their own vulnerable populations so that they are at the center of any kind of planning that takes place.
I mean, that difficult question, Ian, how do we then help to reduce vulnerability? And it is a difficult question. Do you in community prepared look at that as well and work with groups to see how they can not just identify where the problem is, but find ways of resolving it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a very big and hard question, and yeah, obviously we live in a very unequal society these days, which is no small part in terms of where we are now. I mean, Groundwork as an organisation works across quite a lot of different program streams. So we do things with youth. We have something called Green Doctors. We do a whole range of activities. But quite a lot that's in response to demand from states or subnational actors like local authorities or the GLA. So we often are kind of a service provider. We do also develop our own projects based on our own assessments of need and solutions. So yeah, we are an organization that works across quite a lot of things that do help to try and reduce vulnerability. But I think a lot of the big levers of power often reside with the state, and yeah, we're more of a service provider rather than someone that changes state policy, although we try and do that through case studies and through experience. I'm not sure how well I've answered that question, but it was a big
it's a question that's when you're a voluntary group, it's very difficult to know how you can reduce vulnerability, except by developing, like you said, in COVID, self-help, which I think is really, really important thing to do, where communities help each other. Pamela, you've got your hand up. Pamela Rosling.
Yes, hi. One thing that occurred to me is that if there is a long-term drought, heat wave and long-term drought, there would be a shortage of water, and in that circumstance it would be good for the government to advise people not to eat so much meat, because the most inefficient way of eating is to eat a lot of meat and dairy. It would be better then to restrict people to a more plant-based diet, which doesn't use quite so much water and grain that's grown and then given to the animals. Okay?
Okay, I mean, I'll take that as a comment rather than as a question. But can I say,
Yeah.
unless you want to put it as a question, but let me say that in May we're going to do a forum on water. That will be our first forum that we
okay.
actually do, where we confront a particular problem, and we chose it for that sort of reason, didn't we, Hallie?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And that issue of eating less meat came up in several of the World Cafes we ran in the West Midlands, people suggesting that one of the ways to protect the places that they value and want to protect is to implement lifestyle changes like that. Like, it starts at home.
Okay, so from Hallie to Ali. Ali Hassami, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Francis. An observation and a question. Many of the aspirations of resilience are already, if you like, type of solutions that was raised earlier on, are part of methodologies in other disciplines. My own professional work is in the context of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, and many of the terminologies used for vulnerability, resilience, are the common practice and advanced techniques that are already well developed scientifically. question was, are you trying to tap into existing practices in adjacent areas that have some synergy with your work or not? And if not, why not?
I mean, Kathy put a question up, which is interesting, which partly relates to that when she says that Enfield is behind Haringey, for example, that are tapping into those sort of resources that Ali talks about, because they're working with trees for cities and working quite comprehensively with it. It's an important question because very often, and I think particularly in this country, we don't like to compare. If we say Paris is doing things better, we say, that's Paris. We do our own thing. How important is it from your research, Ali, to look at other case studies of good practice that are not in our region?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's really important. We're not about reinventing the wheel. I think the whole ethos is about finding out what's going on and leveraging existing initiatives and existing resources and networking and communicating. That's why we, other members of my team, work really closely with, for example, Civic Square in Birmingham, who one of the founders was on one of our forums recently. And I'm personally aware of other amazing initiatives across London that I was involved with before I moved to South Africa. And I returned from there a year ago, like Living Under One Sun in Tottenham. So I think absolutely we should be doing more of that. We should be doing more networking, more knowledge exchange, more joint proposal writing, all of it.
And that's one of the values of working with community prepared, isn't it, Ian? That you do have a whole lot of examples of what people are doing so we can learn from each other.
Yeah, so Community Prepared is a program of Groundwork South. So not wanting to complicate things, but I work for Groundwork London, which is we're all like sister trusts, but we operate a bit like a federation. So we're independent charities based on geography, basically. So there's one in Wales, there's one in Manchester. But Communities Prepared is a program of Groundwork South, but it's actually got a national reach. So it tries to help to prepare communities, as the name infers, for all kinds of risks, but I think it does have quite a focus on climate resilience. But I think they're also developing some materials now around power outages and things like that. So yeah, I think they do have some sense of some solutions across the country, and I think somewhere like London, I think where you've got the London Resilience Unit, which is part of the GLA, I think they also have got the London Resilience Forum, I think, which is obviously a kind of capital-wide forum, which and I know they try and kind of like convene, they try and kind of like make linkages and connections, and I would imagine that they've got a bit of a sense of what's happening in different boroughs and try and use that to share. I also know that they also look internationally as well. So, for example, I think New York City is considered to be kind of quite advanced in terms of its resilience, which is why we had someone from New York City on the call, last Tuesday when we had the event. So I think it's really important to look, different geographies, not just within your own country, but beyond borders as well.
Basically, has put several things in the chat and he says he can't speak, so please put his question. Actually, it's a comment, but he says he lives in Enfield Lock, and the lock there needs dredging. There needs to be water tanks to collect water, and that doesn't seem to be there. Is that a sort of idea that we should be working with the local authority to pursue? Ali, if that came out of our cafes, for example, or if we hear a question like that from someone who lives in the area and sees there's a problem.
Sorry, Francis, what is the question? Is that something that we're aiming to?
Yeah. I mean, he's saying in the area he lives in Enfield Lock, the locks there need dredging, and there needs to be water tanks there to collect water. These are the sort of proposals that might come out of our cafes, for example, to give us some idea of what people feel, though we aren't doing one in Enfield Lock at the moment. but clearly this is a problem they have.
Yeah. These are exactly the kinds of things that we hope to come across and hear and report on in the World Cafes. There was a lot of discussion around canal and river stewardship in Birmingham, which has probably some of the most canals anywhere in the nation. They're important for biodiversity, for the people who live on them, for the local economy, for mental health and leisure purposes. And I see Saqib is also talking about, collecting water. So managing water as a resource. All of these things come up repeatedly and will come up. And they'll be part of what we report on. And I think as the project comes to an end and we start thinking about what's next, which feels weird to say because we haven't even really started yet. But I think what we would like to do is be able to identify actionable sort of spin-off projects, identify funding for those things. I mean, I'm looking at community prepared and, £1,000 and thinking, well, they did something similar in Somerset in a project called Act to Adapt, which is focused on nature-based solutions. And that project is all about, okay, we've identified the problems now. We've even identified some solutions. How do we turn those into reality? And that is, in my mind, the really big hurdle. It's relatively easy to find out what's wrong and even to find out how to fix it, because residents have very nuanced visions of what needs to be done that are grounded in lots of lived experience and sort of organic expertise. But it's, at the end of the day, it's how do we make it happen with a limited funding pot and I guess an absence of democracy in our institutions.
Okay, well, let's go on to the next part of our program now. And Ian, I'll understand if you have to go. So thank you for coming and taking part in that. And I hope you've managed to pick up some tips from what we're doing here, which would be great to talk to you about again. What we're going to do now is do a very short interview of Iveta Bajui and Paul Everett, who are involved in the project. So, Iveta, are you on there at all? Are you still there, aren't you? Yeah, I can see you.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. So let's start with you. You've agreed to be let me remove the pen. You've agreed to be a project researcher in this, one of the 8 researchers we've got, 4 in Upper Edmonton, 4 in Cockfosters. Why did you decide that you would like to be a project researcher?
Thank you, Francis. Well, for me, I decided to become a project researcher because I genuinely wanted to make a positive difference in my community. I wanted to connect with the community that I'm part of because I truly believe that community voice is important and can have a powerful impact on the different issues and on the decisions that are being made and that affect us. And I've been part of Edmonton community for a very long time. I've been a resident over 25 years, so it's very personal to me as well. And in terms of the extreme weather specific project that we're working on, I've experienced lots of things myself, including when there are severe storms and winds and how suddenly everything comes to a standstill. And going back to even when I was 8 months pregnant, a woman trying to get from central London back to my home, and a journey that normally should have taken me just under an hour took me over 4-5 hours to try to travel through London to get back home. And the times when we do have snowstorms and everything comes to a standstill because we can't function, we don't know how to deal with it, and that's the way how we are. But it's also about how our community, and together through the collective response of the community, we can come up with the strategies, as Hallie was already talking about, the different strategies, the different solutions, but then also hopefully having an impact through the different partnerships that we have and we collaborate through, because I'm part of EnCaf, I'm part of Edmonton Community Partnership. I've got, sort of bringing in the experience from education sector that I had and the corporate sector, and then bringing all the different partnerships together. So for me, it was about, making a difference and hopefully connecting the community and working with amazing people on this project as well. So,
excuse me. We have, to start this off, we have a training session for the researchers on April the 8th, which all the 8 will go to. So this is a difficult question to ask because you haven't done the training session yet. But what do you think is the role of the researcher?
I mean, from my experience before when I was doing my master's, then there is a different, there are the elements that Hallie has already explained and outlined as she spoke earlier on about the role of the research. And to some extent, Hallie has really well already explained what the role is specifically for the Wild Cafe. For me, the way how I envision my role as a researcher is again about linking the community, ensuring that our community is represented, consulted, being the bridge, as Hallie has outlined as well, between the community and the different partners as well, and looking together on how we can tackle the different issues that relate to climate change and sustainability, the issues that directly affect us. And being part of this community, it's about connecting my experience and connecting with the people that I'm working with. And when we are sort of trying to recruit as well. So for me, it's about really looking together, working together, and making a difference together, and using this information. I know that we're going to be working on the climate risk and the vulnerability index and checking the data as well, but it's also looking at how we can bring what we collect to policy discussions, to working collaboratively with a range of different partners that can then have a positive impact on our community and have an actionable outcome.
And you are also helping as part of the researcher's role to recruit people, to get people to come into the cafe. How have you gone about doing that? Because you've been ahead of everyone else in a way.
Well, it's again drawing on the different partnerships or drawing on the experience that I have from other sectors, personal experience from other sectors, drawing on the different partnerships, because now, working with EnCaf, I work as a volunteer, but also working in Edmonton Community Partnership and drawing on all the different partnerships and the connections that we do have, creating a plan as well. So we do have a plan. We've got Excel spreadsheet. We've put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then making sure that the partners that we are looking at, the way where we are recruiting, so we're recruiting through a variety of different channels to make sure that we reach the diverse communities, which includes the vulnerable communities, which includes the different ethnicities as well, so that our community and the people that we are going to be working with in the cafe is truly representative of the community that we are part of. So it really involves a variety of different channels, variety of using the leaflets, but also online digital channels, word of mouth, connections that we do have with people, and then looking at the face groups, looking at the charitable organizations, looking at community centers, looking at schools, and making all of those connections to make sure that it represents who we are.
Okay, well, I was going to ask you what you hope to achieve by this, but I think you've answered that because you've been very, very expansive in what you said. So let's go to Paul now and ask about Paul's role in this. So you're there, are you, Paul?
I am.
Okay, right. So Paul is from Locomotion, and Locomotion is an organisation in several parts of the UK, pilot projects, and one is in Enfield, and they try to get groups to work collaboratively together to get systemic change and to encourage the use of dialogue for the solution of problems, so that voices that are often unheard can be heard. So, Paul, can I ask you to begin with? You're involved in this, and we're so pleased you've come in on this. Why is this sort of project important to you in terms of your mission?
If everyone listened carefully to Hallie and to Iveta, that's the reason why it's really important. The voices of our communities are rarely heard. And this is a really fantastic way for us to provide a platform where we properly listen to the voices of our community. And I think Hallie put a finger on it when she said that actually quite often these listening exercises happen and then nothing happens with it. And what's really important is what we do next. And I think also to that is, and who do we do that with? And who we do that with must be those communities that we're talking to. How do we create those platforms where our communities are leading rather than things are being done to our communities? Because we've as a society, we all can see, I think, that we now have created a culture where someone else does something and we are the recipients of what they do. And we need to become again a culture where we lead things which are to do with us. So at the heart of local motion, we believe that the communities most affected by things are the people who should be making the decisions about things. So if decisions are being made about provision for disability in Enfield, disabled people must be at the table deciding how those services are run.
Okay, and one of the things that you got quite excited about when you heard about this project was the World Cafe way of doing things, because that's something that Locomotion is particularly interested in, isn't it?
Local Motion have created a learning framework. And the reason why we've created this, I'm going to post it into the chat so you can all see it. Why Local Motion have created this is because we believe that we should all be learning together. And the learning should be iterative learning. Sorry, I've lost you now. I'm too busy looking at my website. Apologies. Right, I've posted it in our link. So we should all be, so we've created a toolkit to sort of talk about how we embed learning within ourselves, within the work we do and within our communities. And and we talk about some of the theory of learning that Local Motion is doing. And part of that is that we shouldn't be leaving people behind. We should all be learning together. So part of us learning together is ensuring that parts of our community aren't left behind us, and we don't just tell people what to do. We learn together, and sometimes that means going back and learning again and going back and learning again until we're all at the same place. And part of our learning, we've developed some tools of learning. So some of the tools we can learn to use to help us learn together. And one of those tools is the World Cafe model. So if you look in our toolkit, you'll see that actually I'll put a link to what that World Cafe model looks like. So it's a tool within our toolkit. So we're really excited that this initiative is using that World Cafe tool.
The other thing,
But it's one tool within a huge toolkit.
Yes, sure. But one other thing that fits in with what Locomotion has focused on is the East-West divide in a way. And you were quite keen that we were doing something in the West, in Cockfosters, in the East, in Upper Edmonton. How important is it to ensure that we have that sort of representation?
The East-West divide is quite an interesting thing. I mean, we all can see the difference between, in a crude sense, that the east of the borough has much higher levels of deprivation than the west of the borough. However, in the west of the borough, there are also huge pockets of deprivation too. So we're not really talking about east versus west. We're talking about equity, really, at the heart of it. But this initiative, by looking at Cock Fosters, that if you look in the index of deprivation, is one of the wealthiest parts of the UK, and then you're looking at Upper Edmonton, which is in amongst the poor, the bottom 10% of deprivation in the UK, that it will be interesting to see how those communities feel about resilience, how they see the climate crisis, how they see their own resilience to it. I don't want to, at this point, predict or what those communities are going to say. What this gives us the opportunity is really listen to what they've got to say, because we must come to those conclusions after we've heard what the community have got to say, not before.
Okay, well, let's bring other people in now. Does anyone else have a question they want to raise? Asani again.
Okay, my question to, excuse me, sorry, to Eva is that, my question to Eva is that the point she made, I'm sorry, to the last speaker, is that, I think it should incorporate what is known as the whole of society approach, because you have to carry all members of the society along. Then that's my question to him, basically. And to Eva, sorry. Hello?
Let's go on.
Hello?
Go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you. Just ask your question.
Okay, but to Eva, if she's listening, my question to her is that the challenge I foresee is how to incorporate, how to make policies and plans operationalized. After the research, how will she ensure policies and plans are operationalized? And and to the last speaker is that how is it incorporating the whole of society approach? Because you can't address resilience without incorporating this whole of society approach. That's my two questions to both speakers, to the two speakers.
Okay, well, Evita, do you want to have a go at responding to that? Because that's a very big question.
It is a very big question indeed, and it's going to be done through the collaboration with the partners that I'm working with, which includes the University of Birmingham, who is leading on this project, and Locomotion as well. And then that's through these different collaborations that we do have, will include the aspect that Paul was talking about as well there, and Ali was talking about, where it's not just about that we find the problems, we find the possible solutions, but looking also how we implement those solutions through the voice of the people that we have included. So that includes all the different frameworks, and I will be implementing those frameworks specifically to this project, as I will be taught in the training that I will be attending within a couple of weeks' time as well. So hopefully that will include some of those aspects that have been asked in this particular question. However, I'm sure that Paul or Halle might be able to add even more detail in terms of how we can implement
let Paul come in on this, because Paul, it's often been said in Locomotion meetings I've been to that we get people to talk, we have dialogue, but where is the actions after? How do we implement? And I think that's what Asani is getting at.
Yes, and I think in principle, Ethana, you're right, that we should be looking at the whole of society, but in reality, parts of our community are listened to a lot less than others. And until we've got a level playing field, that isn't possible. But I think the aspiration that we should be looking to we should always be listening to everyone, but we should be mindful of the communities that need a little bit more support to be listened to, because they've been driven down. The confidence levels in part of our community are so low that they don't feel confidence to have the platform to speak. So in principle, I agree with you, but in practice, we're not in a point of equity so that we hear balanced voices.
You want to come on this at all, Halle? I think you were trying to. Halle? We can't hear you. No, we can't hear you. While you're trying to sort your sound out, we'll go to Aurora because you've got your hand up.
Yeah.
Aurora?
Yes, I follow this discussion very, very closely, and it's very much close to my heart because I'm involved in developing. I mean, the area where I live, which is Bowes. We set up a community residents association, and as we are trying to negotiate things with the council, it's so obvious that there is this huge imbalance of power, which manifests in lots of different things. You know, even getting the streets cleaned up, it required months of negotiation with the council and pressing them and pointing out things which should have been very obvious to them. But the latest example is that the community has offered, the Residents Association has offered to plant, you know, to do the planting, to repair these green spaces which have been created by the council in the main road, and they've been totally neglected, and now they look very, very miserable, and they are full of cigarette butts. And the council is not even prepared to give us money to plant, to buy these plants, to put them into those places. We offer to do it ourselves. So you know, this is what I'm trying to say is that I think areas like ours need to find the tools of how to raise a few £1,000s to buy these plants that we are prepared to you know, to do and look after ourselves. Something that the council actually should be doing, because these are rain gardens which require special, I think they require special attention and a special approach, not just any other just sort of like green space on the side of a road. Anyway, so that's what I was trying to say, that the tools that are required is how to turn this imbalance, and much of it is about material things that the residents could do and build confidence and you know, just have a sense that no, we need the council, but we also can do things ourselves. But you know, it's sometimes it's about money.
Those tools, I mean, the tools of how to do it and the tools of getting money to help communities in the way you said. Are those the sort of tools we can develop as part of the ongoing process of this project, Hallie? Let's hope your sound's working now.
Is it working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I was typing my answer to the last question, so I didn't hear this one. I'm so sorry. Can you just the nutshell version?
Oh yeah, I mean, what Aurora is saying is that you know, that she's been trying to get the council involved in her area in doing things that will help with sustainability, and they really aren't doing much. They won't even give them the smallest bit of finance to plant trees, to have drainage, or whatever they want to do. And what we need, she's saying, is the tools to implement what we do, to get local authorities to do it, or find tools to do it ourselves, or find ways of getting money. Is that something that you think we can take up as a project and develop further?
Yeah, absolutely. And Aurora, I'm really sorry for not hearing your whole question. I'm hopeless. I cannot multitask. I think one of the goals of the handbook is to provide some of those tools and resources. So we're doing this for the West Midlands, and I imagine we'll do it for Enfield as well. So the handbook, in addition to, you know, how to run these rural cafes, will be, these are the funds that you can apply for money for, if you're even just a resident or a community group. These are the laws and bylaws that you can leverage. These are the maybe key points in the policy cycle where you can turn up to meetings. Here's a template for making your report, just like our reports around the World Cafes, and using that as a document, as evidence of your own. But I also think, in addition to those kinds of tools, we need to focus on building relationships, because sometimes getting something done is a matter of getting somebody who believes in you to listen to you. And I think that's going to be one of our objectives too, is targeting who we know. And I think in a sense, I mean, that's going to be a lot more Francis's job, because I'm kind of new in town. But building relationships with key people, getting them to come to our events, sweet talking them a little bit, showing them what we've done and showing them what we think is possible in a constructive way.
Okay, Kath, you've got your hand up.
Yes, hi everyone, and thank you very much. Very interesting, and really appreciate the work of EnCaf to bring all these issues to light and rally. I guess some thoughts that I have include, I wonder about the business and industry, so people who work in businesses, people who own companies that are in Enfield or in local areas, wherever the focus is, and how I guess initiatives like this can also help get more radical thinking around even that sort of workplace thing of, right, we're going to be dedicated to this civic issue, or we're able to provide these resources or materials in an issue and in the event of something occurring. And just, yeah, maybe getting a bit more like how spread out and how connected we can be as community, but also as all community organizations and as businesses as well, and those with materials. I wondered as well about that planting issue, if like there are nurseries or there are ways of growing our own like plants for the borough as well, for example. And also just, yeah, for that Lady Aurora, I know the Palmer's Green action team are really on it with planters and things like that, and they might have some suggestions or some info kind of on that basis. And I guess the third point / question or thought that's just coming through is about communications, and both reaching people in communities who might not have ever come across EnCaf, and what initiatives you guys or any of you have found to really help increase awarenesses, because I think a lot of this future scenario planning is also an opportunity to speak about our behaviour as choices, our power as consumers, the civic glue that's there. So all of this is like really good stuff, and there's lots of, I guess, ways that we can think of, whether it's actual notice boards that are about climate, and other ways. So if there are issues down the line as well where communication systems are a bit down, there are other ways, and it's more like visible as well, more visibility in our communities, all these issues. So connections with industry and business, radical new approaches about resource sharing and communications. Any comments on those? Thank you.
Well, let's take those 3 points. If you take the first, or you respond to the second, and I'll respond to the third, and then we'll finish the discussion and go on a bit more. By the way, we were hoping to have Glenn Stewart from the London Borough of Enfield here, but he couldn't come. I think they've been in crisis for the last few weeks because of the measles outbreak, the possibility of meningitis, that they've been overwhelmed, and he says he will come on again. So he's not here tonight. But Hallie, I mean, in all things we're doing, we're talking about communities, we're talking about statutory authorities. We haven't been talking a lot about businesses and social enterprises, have we? Should we involve them more?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two things, I think. Is it Kath? Yeah, that resonated when you were talking. I think we do need a more strategic approach for leveraging the support and the resources of business and industry. I think that needs to go well beyond CSR and business as usual, and sort of instrumental incremental approaches. The problem when you get too radical, I think, is that it scares business away. Maybe one of the answers is again about building relationships, and thinking of businesses as also local employers and residents themselves. It's probably easier to work with people in business and industry if they're tied to the area than trying to contact some developer that's over in Hong Kong. And I think that's how Civic Square ended up getting to where they are today. Well, I mean, I don't mean to be reductive at all, but I think part of how they sort of got their land and got their sort of Civic Square up and running was by appealing to making a really strong business case, but also an ethical business case to people with resources who actually cared about the area. The thing I wanted to touch on about power as consumers, I think we have to be really careful about that, because there's a fine line between empowering people as consumers and responsibilizing people as consumers. And what I found in some of the more deprived parts of the West Midlands was people didn't want to be empowered as consumers. They wanted to be empowered as citizens. They felt like they didn't have enough information or resources, and they didn't feel like they wanted to have to make decisions about what kind of blinds to put up to keep the heat out, and stuff like that. So yeah, there could be kind of a metaphorical East-West divide on what we mean by consumer power. Just something to think about in Upper Edmonton, I imagine.
I mean, Aurora, I mentioned you coming on this because that's a second point that Kath raised and that you were dealing with, Hallie. Aurora, I mean, Kath was talking about working with the action team in Palmer's Green and getting advice from them and working in a partnership which gives you more power, and maybe they have a good relationship that they develop with certain officers. Is that something that is worth, exploring?
Partnership with who?
The action team in Palmer's Green that actually is about clearing out Palmer's Green, planting trees, making it more suitable to live in.
Yes, I think it's a very different. I mean, I very much agree that the approach has to be neighborhood by neighborhood, because our area is very different from Palmer's Green. Yeah, even though it's just over the south of the North Circular from Palmer's Green, and sometimes it is called Palmer's Green, but it's a very different situation in this area. And it is not about eventually we'll manage to find plants somehow or other, but it is about the approach, which is that local authorities have a paternalistic approach, as it's been pointed out, and also not just paternalistic, but also authoritarian, in the sense that we know what we should be doing, we know what needs to be done, and when they fail in that they become very defensive, and they are not really prepared to budge very much from their positions. This is my experience with Enfield Council.
Do you want to respond to that, Kath, from your experience? Is there any way you think you could advise?
But I mean, it is about the council not very interested in empowering communities. This is my experience. They're not very interested. They're just responding because now there's these elections and they are very worried about their results. But and even that response is very limited. So the question is how we empower our communities so that the councils are having to respond to us. It is about political things.
I mean, do you want to respond to that, Kath?
Yeah, sure. Just briefly. I mean, I think my thought was about exchanging tips and hearing how people are getting things done. And I think that sort of encouragement and relationship building of organisers feels really important as well. And there are a lot of sort of groups out there, of course, Friends of Parks groups, etc. I've been helping out at the Woodcroft Wild Space recently in N21. Another example of, you know, spaces that are volunteer run. That one is entirely, and there's lots of skills and tips there. And I wonder, yeah, just to sort of share and connect on advice. And then also, this is the kind of thing that I wonder also about, like gardens and local nurseries, whether it's businesses or whether it's community run spaces, how there can be more kind of flow. So communities can, as you suggest, which is really important, be able to have direct sort like links to resources, whether that's plants, whether that's advice, and sort of just keep things flowing. I guess a lot of local authorities, like it's all a bit challenging, isn't it, really, in terms of the picture. So the much more that we can do of ease and flow of resources seems like a really good positive thing.
Okay, all right, thanks. I mean, we're sort of coming to the end of this now, and I mean, the last point you raised, Kath, about communication, about getting information out. I mean, we do a lot of things, and we can do a lot of things a lot better, but we only can do it within our capacity in a way. On businesses, for example, we did work with Enterprise Enfield to see if we could set up a green business network. And what was interesting is the businesses who came, they were really, really keen. You know, they weren't against looking at green solutions. They really wanted to be involved. And opinion polls that I've seen around small and medium-sized enterprises and social enterprises show that they are very keen. And many social enterprises are in the forefront of doing innovative sustainability behavior. But we can do a lot more in getting information out. We use social networks a lot, but I know there are lots of groups of people that we haven't reached, and we need to find ways of doing that. And I think that's true of all voluntary groups. They tend to work with the groups that they've got, and going out and doing it is difficult. I know the people campaigning against housing in Cruise Hill are now about to deliver 25,000 leaflets with only 2 or 3 people to do it. So it shows you how difficult it is to get information out sometimes, but it's something that we're always trying to improve and struggle with. And I hope, you know, we do it reasonably well. I mean, we have a really good database of people for our forums and our activities. We've got hundreds, if not thousands of people on our social networks, but we've got to reach those people who don't use those networks. And I think that's a problem we should give more attention to. So I think you're absolutely right on that. But look, we sort of come to the end of this now, and it's been a good discussion, and you see what we're trying to do. And I hope we will manage to do it reasonably successful. Hey, what do you think is the next step forward? Where do we go from here?
Oof. Where do we go from here? I think we need to do a really good job of mapping our assets in these world cafes. I think we need to get the handbook out there and get people to be replicating, reporting in a uniform way, and gathering some sort of momentum where we can present a whole bunch of evidence to local authorities, to them, essentially helping them to do their jobs and trying to find ways to align with what is already going on, and try to repurpose some of what is already going on without them knowing it necessarily.
And Holly, for me, it's genuinely about the voices of our community, having the power as citizens, just as you did say, you know, and it's about being the part of the decisions that affect us and affect our community.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll keep you in touch with what we're doing. And you know, I hope you'll get involved. And if any of you want to be involved more with us in our core group, please let us know, and we'll certainly invite you and welcome you. So thanks everyone. And our next forum will be, I think, April the 28th, and it's going to be on biodiversity and how the challenge to biodiversity could impact on the whole of life on this planet, and what we can do locally as well to increase the biodiversity of our own borough. So I hope you'll join us for that one as well.